Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about the role of generative AI in analyzing and managing data. We'll look at some of the challenges involved and also discuss ways to address those challenges and get the most from generative AI. To discuss that, I'm joined by Nima Negahban, co-founder and CEO at Kinetica. Nima, very good to have you with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I think that companies are really grappling with the idea of getting more from generative AI, specifically managing and analyzing their data. That's a real dream. It feels like it's still ahead of the curve. What do you see? I mean, you're down there in the trenches, so to speak. I mean, as companies try to get the most from generative AI in terms of analyzing the data, managing their data, what do you see going on these days?
Yeah, I mean, it's really early days, just like you said, but certainly there's a lot of interest in being able to leverage generative AI around analyzing it in ways where it lives, but also being able to leverage generative AI to really make the developer, make the analyst more productive, right? And that's really the first phase of what we're seeing is kind of that co-pilot use case, and we're certainly seeing a lot of innovation there to be able to really understand all of the data in the ecosystem and then be able to rapidly generate analytics queries or code, and be able to make developers and analysts way more productive. And that's really what our focus has been.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you talk to executives, I'm assuming you probably talk with a number of executives. That do you sense that there's a real eagerness to, we'll open our wallets now, we need to dive into this, or is it more like, well, we need to do some research and we're thinking about spending money on it? What does the market feel like out there?
You're seeing both. I mean, certainly there is definitely a lot of interest, and a lot of response to the kind of this has kind of been like a generational movement that's occurred, right? It's definitely one of those inflection points, and so there's there's a lot more open-mindedness in the industry right now to being able to see how to leverage this, right? So there's kind of how do I get it to be able to generate to really optimize and make what we're doing more efficient, make our developers more efficient, our analysts more efficient, but also how do we make newer products, better products, to leverage this as well. So it's going in different directions. I think right now the real focus area is how do we leverage this to make everyone more productive, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a decent amount of kind of concrete use cases and research already done that you can point to that says, yeah, this is there are some patterns here that you can follow to that is going to work for what your enterprise is doing, right? And then there's kind of the more elaborate stuff that is still kind of futures, right? Where generative might be just doing things wholesale, and that is still where there's still kind of a lot of hype and hand waving.
I think it's a really good point that there are, clear specific use cases. Companies aren't just thinking, well, we need to get on this bandwagon. There's actually a reason for us to get on this bandwagon. Can you point to, say, one, maybe two, actually use cases where generative is helping people with their data?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, like the things we're working on Kinetica. I mean, to be able to understand all the metadata in the ecosystem, and then to be able to ask a generative model to generate code to write a query for you, from natural language to to that SQL code. That's something that there's a clear use case there, and a clear benefit where you can have a chatbot that can really take any type of question, scan all the data that your enterprise might be collecting and give you an answer.
Mhm. Well, if say an executive said to you, "Hey, we're struggling with this. Anything you recommend? What's sort of either best case or your advice, your thoughts you might offer to companies about using generative AI and data? What should they be aware of? What might help them?"
I think it's just start backwards, right? Like really understand what is your goal, right? Like because like we started this conversation, a lot of people want to be in it because they think they should be, right? And not really knowing what is their destination, right? So try to understand what is your end goal use case that you're trying to solve for, and then work it back. And that's really when I speak to folks who want to understand how do I leverage generative for my data, I often begin with, well, what are you looking to do, right? And often there's not a clear answer there, and so we kind of help bring that out. But at the end of the day, this is early days, right? And there's just going to be a lot of discovery still to happen.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's drill down into specifically what is Kinetica doing? How is Kinetica addressing the data needs of its clients in terms of generative these days?
Yeah, so what we do is very specific. We'll actually scan your enterprise's data lake, right? Pull out all the metadata necessary. If you want, pull the data as well, and then essentially allow you to talk to your data, ask a question, type out a question. We'll generate the necessary code, SQL, be able to run that in the background for you, either inside of our database or where it lives in another database, and then present that to you, and then allow you to visualize it in a number of different ways.
Aha. Okay. So you're really turning all that metadata into a scannable repository that would really enable generative AI, if I'm understanding that
That's
correctly.
right. Yeah. So essentially what we do is, we scan all that metadata, put it in a form that our large language model understands, and then add your question to the context, right? And so essentially you get a conversational experience, right? Where you can ask it anything, right? It's going to, understand all of the data assets in your ecosystem and then generate the right code to give you the final answer.
Mm-hmm. The idea of the large language model, I think, is fascinating, and there's a lot of talk about that sort of almost underneath the headlines. You said our large language model. I mean, clarify, it is specifically Kinetica's. I'm assuming companies, of course, making their own proprietary in many cases. Explain to me a little bit about the LLM.
Yeah, I mean, there is, a lot of foundational models, and then there's a lot of fine tuning done on top of those foundational models. And then when you go even to a customer, you do again another set of fine tuning, or you do prompt tuning. So there's kind of different types of best practices, but also kind of tuning frameworks that are arising. So when you go to an enterprise, traditionally what we'll do is, we'll start and work with a customer, see how our accuracy is. If needed, we can do prompt tuning. And if we really need to, because enterprises have their own terminology sometimes, and, some of that needs to be tuned into, fine tuned into the model, whether that's through prompts or through an actual fine tuning.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that companies are just a general question about LLMs and how that affects the market? Do you think companies will in general need to create their own proprietary LLMs going forward?
No, I think most enterprises are going to be fine with just fine tuning. I mean, fine tuning is kind of the last step. Even before that, you can do context or prompt tuning, right? Which is kind of an easier method. And then if you think about large language models as like a web of weights, fine tuning, is the kind of the last step where you can actually adjust those weights. So, I think most enterprises are going to be able to get pretty far with, what's going to be in a lot of products out there to be, automated. I think the products that, we're building and other data infrastructure companies are building are built around the notion of just making it really simple for an enterprise to do that type of, extra training or fine tuning through their products.
Mm-hmm. And one thing you mentioned you're scanning the metadata, just my own education. So it could be metadata about structured or unstructured data, either one.
For us, right now we're focused on structured. For unstructured, we're actually building stuff as well, but that's not yet out. But there certainly is, as far as metadata in unstructured, there's certainly the easy stuff, and that stuff we're working on. But I think there's going to be also a lot of innovation on just how you scan unstructured data and pull out, not necessarily pre or deterministically decided or human input metadata, but actually like auto-generated metadata from unstructured. But I think for us, we're just fully focused on structured and pulling out the metadata that way.
I'm assuming the unstructured offers a thornier problem, and maybe long term there's the greatest amount of growth there, or not necessarily?
Unstructured, I mean, so with unstructured, there's a lot of focus there right now, with generative and vector search, right? And taking images or text blobs or audio and doing a vector embedding from that and doing vector search. But there's going to be a lot of growth for on the structured and unstructured side, as far as like being able to extract metadata besides vectors, right? And give that to the LLM.
Well, I think the big question is the future. What do you see in terms of the future relationship between data and generative AI? It's a vast topic. I'm sure you probably spend 4 hours talking about it. But if you look, say, 2, 3 years in the future, what kind of things do you see going on?
I think there's a lot of, so I think there's like one thing is around standardization, right? And how are large language models going to speak to other knowledge bases, right? Right now there are kind of plugins or plugin frameworks like LangChain that is really picking up, but there's going to be a standardization period around how large language models are going to interact with enterprise, and that I think is going to be happening here in the next 1 to 2 years as these common patterns emerge, right? Because I think large language models and large language model agents are going to be kind of these always running entities that are doing what's I think is what's being labeled as chain of thought workflows, where they're actually taking multi-step processes, and so they're going to be able to do more complex workflows. And in order to accomplish that, they're going to need to be able to interact with systems and services on their own.
Just all right, for my own education, there was a phrase you used, system of thought. Was that it?
Chain of thought.
Chain of thought. What is, for my information, what is a chain of thought workflow?
Chain of thought is essentially where you're asking it to do an entire workflow, and it almost feeds back onto itself. So it'll do one step, get an answer, feed that back into itself, and then or to another agent. And essentially, there's a lot of projects out there, but I think the most popular one is AutoGPT, where you can actually get it to do a pretty large multi-step workflow by kind of giving it a task and a goal, and it's able to actually start to iterate and do all the necessary steps in between.
So it really does mimic human functionality at a pretty profound level.
Theoretically, when you actually start to get in there, you can see that it's early days, but yeah, like the bones are there, which is the exciting thing.
That is exciting.
Yeah.
Nima, I think you said it. It's a lot of fascinating stuff. It's going to be a fascinating sector to follow in the years ahead.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your insight, and please come back and talk with us again sometime.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.